Will do. Welcome, everyone.
I hear all these doorbells as people are coming into the room. It's so fun just to see, like, oh, somebody else is popping in the participant list on my phone over here. So one of the things, because this is a Northeastern alumni event, so one of the things that I think is cool is that Stephanie and I were talking yesterday about how with the virtual events, it's really cool to be able to reach alumni who are all over the country, maybe even all over the world, I don't know, but reach people with this content who find this content valuable from all over versus if we were just doing an in-person event. So Mary Ann introduced herself in the chat. Hi, Mary Ann. Our names are very similar. She's an NU alumna from 1971, still in Massachusetts. So anxiety, having trouble breathing, is that typical for you? And you know, feel free to share only what you're comfortable with, of course.
No, it's all new from this time. Never had it before.
Okay. So related to kind of the uncertainty that's happening?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. So we're definitely going to talk about that with the content, but that is so common right now. And I'll share more of the themes that I'm seeing. And Mary, so we all are like name twins in Florida. Mm-hmm. So welcome, glad you're here. What are the things that are you take care of yourself right now? And then is there a way, like if people join late, Stephanie, is there a way to like get rid of the little doorbell?
I am not. I'm not sure. I think once it's rolling, it's rolling.
Okay. So the other thing too is that just so that everyone knows, this presentation is being recorded. We are going to stop the recording when the presentation piece is over and do some question and answer at the end. Our plan is to just make sure that that question and answer space can be a safe space. So like always, you know, please share if you feel comfortable sharing, and if there's something you're not comfortable sharing, either save it for the end, or you can you know, message me or email me. But we don't want anyone to feel like they're making themselves uncomfortable by sharing too much, but certainly know that there's some universal themes right now that we can hopefully address. Okay, so everybody else who's here only see comments from Mary Ann and from Mary. So say hi in the comments and tell us a little bit about who you are. And I'm looking, I realize when I can see it on my phone that I'm looking down a lot. The presentation's on my computer and the comments are down here on my phone. So I'm making sure to check that too. Is anybody else besides me on the West Coast, I wonder? So I am currently in Tacoma, Washington. It was like after I'm originally from New Hampshire, and then I graduated from Northeastern in 2002, I think. Yes, that's right. In 2002, and then moved to San Diego, and then up here to Washington, and have been here ever since. So I'm a West Coast Northeastern, which there's a pretty big presence in Seattle, it seems like, with Northeastern Seattle. So that I'm not alone there. Doorbell. Oh, there's a link for closed captioning in the comments. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. Oh, I see chat. Yay. in Massachusetts still, 1988. Thank you for coming. I'm so glad that you're here. And just, like I said, feel free to share whatever you're comfortable sharing in the comments. But I do think that there's definitely value in sort of sharing the things that make it hard, because there's definitely some universal West Coast here. Sherilyn from Boston, problems with sleeping. I'm guessing probably anxiety related. Ashley from Ohio, maintaining social connection. Man, that is, that is so hard right now. And something that I think has had really intense impacts on people's mental health, because depending on your living situation, and I don't know if you live with other people or if you live alone or what that looks like, but that's such a huge challenge. And that part of what we're going to be focusing on today is really like the self piece. And so, maintaining connections comes after that, but also how do we do that in the current climate, and what does that look like? And I don't know about you guys, but we've been doing some different things that we wouldn't typically do, like playing like the house party app and playing games with family members who live far away, which we wouldn't be seeing them right now anyways because they live far away, but at the same time, like, helped us increase our connection. And I know that that's still not an adequate substitute. Lindsay, thank you for joining us from LA. Hopefully your weather today is nicer than ours. We're having like actually really atypical Northwest weather because it is rainy, but it's also thundering, which is not very common for us. So pretty fun for me being from New England originally. Okay, so Stephanie, do we want to give it like another couple minutes? Do we want to
I think we'll wait till for me in Boston, 1:05 for you all on the West Coast, 10:05, and anyone in between, 5 minutes after the start time, and then we'll get going. We'll let a few more people trickle in.
Okay. There's another doorbell. That's so funny. I've never noticed it before because I think like people are just joining all kind of like right at the same time here, and all like the trickles in is making that doorbell be really noticeable. Okay, so cool. Karen is in the other Washington, DC. It's funny because growing up on the East Coast, like you say Washington and you always mean DC. And I forget that when I talk to people from the East Coast now, and I have to like specify Washington State. I'm from Washington State, not DC. Thank you for being here. I'm glad that you came. So if anyone else is willing to share just any challenges you have either currently with this whole quarantine thing that we're dealing with, or just in general, what are the things that you taking better care of yourself, motivation. So I think that like one of the things that I hear, which we'll address a bit in the presentation, but one of the things that I hear really commonly is people don't feel like they have time. And so I'm curious if that's something that resonates for people, that feels like what you experience. Karen, if you're comfortable sharing with motivation, is that like tell me more. What is that about? Is it related to specifically this quarantine situation? That is there like a sense of hopelessness, or is it a low energy thing? I'd love to hear more about that. Yeah, quarantine, low energy. Yeah. Okay. So all of this, what you guys are saying, this motivation, the quarantine, the low energy, it feels like that kind of sense of helplessness because we're in a situation in which we've kind of lost any like external structure, external accountability. And we'll definitely address that. That's definitely one of the super, super common themes that I'm seeing right now. And then Victoria, hi, welcome. All these Boston folks are making me miss Boston. I want to come back for a visit. My challenge these days is staying motivated. Yeah. Focusing on goals. Super common. We were just talking about going to visit. My parents are still in New Hampshire, going to visit Boston and New Hampshire. And my boyfriend's never been to the Northeast. And he's like, I really want to do a bike ride in the fall and see the foliage. And having grown up there, I just don't even think about that. Like, it doesn't seem exciting to me. But we're definitely thinking maybe next year we'll come back. Okay, so feeling like I'm in a prison. Yeah, feeling really stuck. Indoor versus outdoor time. So that's the thing. So in Boston, I'm not even sure. Oh, you're welcome for doing this event. So I'm not even sure, like, are you allowed to go outside? It sounds like maybe moving into that next phase soon. And actually, if it's something I've been thinking about here, like, we live near a really big park that's been open the entire time for trail hiking, and you can't park there, but you can certainly walk the trails or run the trails. And something, you know, there's definitely a difference when you're in a big city and aren't able to really get outside and get that time in nature.
Okay, so I think we'll get started, and please bear with me as people might be entering the waiting room. I'm gonna have to just pop in to let them in. First of all, welcome everyone. I'm so excited to have you here. My name is Stephanie Foner, and I work in the Office of Alumni Relations at Northeastern on our domestic engagement team, which means I work with alumni such as Mary Allison and across the country to put on events and programs for our alumni. So just a couple housekeeping notes. If folks could please mute their microphones and use the chat box to ask any questions. There will be time for Q&A at the end, but if you need any clarifications during the program, please feel free to ask them in the chat box. Both Mary Allison and I are keeping an eye on it, so we will make sure that your questions are addressed. I also recommend that you pin Mary Allison's screen. Right now she's screen sharing, so obviously it takes up the entire screen, but during Q&A, her face, you'll want it to be in the center. So if you just go to the little dots in the corner of her screen and you can pin it, that would be great. And then lastly, in the reminder email that I sent earlier today, you received 2 links to documents that are going to be referenced. And I am about to put them in the chat box again in case you did not get a chance to see them. So let me, oh wait, sorry, hold on one second, bear with me. Why is this not working? Oh, it did work. I just didn't see it. Sorry, hold on just a moment. Okay. So those are now posted in the chat. And I'm excited to introduce you all to Mary Allison. Mary Allison Brown graduated with her BS from Northeastern in 2002, and she went on to earn her master's degree in social work from the University of Washington. She's a licensed independent clinical social worker. She currently lives in Tacoma, Washington, as she has shared, and she has a private mental health therapist. She is a private mental health therapy therapist, a consultant, and helps through her coaching practice. So with that said, I'm going to hand it over to Mary Allison.
Yay, thank you. So yes, thank you for being here. Stephanie actually recently saw I had, when this had happened, when we first here in Washington went into our stay home, stay healthy order, I was in the process of working on this new brand called Ever Evolving Personal Growth. And the whole purpose of that brand was to be doing in-person events and educational experiences and just really talking about sort of all things personal growth, because there are themes that come up day after day after day in what I'm talking to my clients about, the tools that I'm using. And so we were really excited. We had 3 in-person events scheduled for May, and then this all happened. So my assistant and I sort of got together and looked at each other, and we're deciding, like, what can we do now to support people in this sort of midst of this crisis? And we pulled together really quickly a online virtual summit called Thriving in Uncertain Times. And we had, oh, someone has to leave. It's okay. If you do, there'll be a replay. So we pulled together 6 days of content, 72 expert speakers in areas of self-care and healthy habits, mental health, finance, everything that people are struggling with right now, health, and ultimately ended up with thousands of people participating in that event. And really, we're seeing this shift, right, to this more digital platform. And so that's how Stephanie found me, and I'm really excited to share this topic with you today. Just to be very honest with you, I kind of hate the term self-care because I know what everyone does when we talk about self-care, right? And people tend to be really dismissive of it, even before this all happened. What happens when I show up to talk to people about self-care is that they sort of roll their eyes, and they shake their head and they say, sure, I know I should take better care of myself. That would be nice if I had time, or if I had the money, or if this other thing. It's very conditional. And especially as a social worker, in the field of social work, as helping professionals, tons of lip service is given to the idea of self-care, and almost nobody practices it effectively. And so I've gone through this whole process of, like, how do I talk to people about self-care in a way that they can hear it, in a way that they can actually implement and apply these things to their own life? And what I've really come to, even with my mental health therapy clients, is that self-care is actually mental health hygiene. And if we want to be able to show up in our lives as the best version of ourselves, if we want to show up feeling centered and balanced, and like we can give to others, we can receive from others, we have to learn how to take the best care of ourselves. So I have continued to sort of beat this self-care drum, and I hope that I can talk about it today in a way that makes you feel like it's something that is realistic and is doable and doesn't have to be overwhelming or another thing on your to-do list. So today, our topic is sustainable self-care in times of stress to support emotional health and well-being. And we're going to sort of start with an overview of what does that even mean? Like, what does emotional health and well-being even mean? What is that? So we're going to move into that, but I do want to mention one more piece. So in my clinical therapy practice, I'm a certified clinical trauma specialist, and I'm also an infant and early childhood mental health specialist, but now I actually work with a lot of adults. All of my clients have some type of, whether it's small trauma or big trauma, some type of childhood trauma. And they usually come to therapy because they realize that whatever trauma has happened in their life is negatively impacting them to this day. And so they come to me and they say, I really want to dig into all of my childhood trauma, please. I want to heal these things. And I always say, okay, great. And what are you doing right now to take care of yourself? And I always am met with this blank expression looking back. And one of the hugest points that I want to make today is that the way that you take care of yourself every single day, the way that you show up for yourself every single day, is the foundation for the rest of your life. So when we dig into childhood trauma or limiting beliefs or self-sabotaging patterns of behavior or whatever it is, that's all destabilizing. We have to have this solid foundation first to be able to do that work. So let's dig in. So what even is emotional health and well-being? It's kind of fluffy language. What does that mean? First, it means that we have the ability and the capacity to form close and secure relationships with other people. That's something, of course, right now, somebody had mentioned in the comments, feeling connected, maintaining that social connection. We need that social connection. But think about the person who's always overly reactive or isn't able to participate in those relationships in a meaningful way. That's why we have to sort of give to ourselves first, take care of ourselves first. It's also the ability to experience, regulate, and express all emotions appropriately. So something that people think about is that if somebody's sad or if somebody's dysregulated, that maybe they're not emotionally healthy, and that's not the case. It's our job to feel our feelings. Feelings are here so that we can feel them. They give us information, and we want to be able to experience the full range of human emotion in an appropriate, healthy way. And then optimal functioning of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Are you acting and thinking and experiencing emotion in ways that are aligned with your values? And so that's kind of what we're talking about. I'm seeing questions in the chat, and I'm not really gonna be able to answer them, I think, as we go. But we are definitely leaving space for that. So Stephanie is going to be tracking them, and then she'll be kind of reading them back to me towards the end. So that's happening. So I just want to let everyone know I'm not ignoring you. If it is something that like is a misunderstanding or needs to be cleared up right now, Stephanie's monitoring the chat, so she can let me know. Okay, so we know that stress negatively impacts our mental and emotional health and well-being. And in our sort of current situation, there are a lot of things that are causing stress that we've never had to face before. One of the things that we were talking about in the chat earlier is this new sense of anxiety. And there's a couple reasons for that. So first of all, we don't know what to expect. It's a basic emotional need of human beings to have a sense of predictability. And right now, we don't. That's been taken away from us. And so it's taking a lot of mental energy. It's really taxing to think about all of the possibilities, all of the potential outcomes, and what you should do next, and weighing all of the outcomes. So that's a big stressor for people. Another thing that's really important in terms of our stress levels during this sort of unprecedented time that we're in right now is that a lot of people that I'm talking to, a lot of my clients are seeing an increase in negative self-talk. They're seeing increases in stress, and they are judging themselves by these standards that no longer exist. So if you judge your performance as an employee in a certain way, and now all of a sudden you're being forced to work from your kitchen table with 3 other people in the house, and you don't have any privacy, and you don't necessarily have everything you need, your success in your job is going to look different. And if you judge yourself as a parent by being really involved in your child's schoolwork, but now you're trying to homeschool your child and work from home and do all of these other things, right? That's just not a realistic expectation anymore. And so one of the biggest questions I think to ask yourself is, how can I adjust my expectations to match my current reality? Because our reality has shifted so much more quickly than our expectations for ourselves. And it's not fair to judge yourself as a failure in a certain area based on standards that just don't exist anymore. I want to talk about my favorite little metaphor for this. So hopefully many of you are familiar with the term, filling someone's bucket or filling their love cup, or how full is your bucket. So we talk about filling our bucket as, what are the things that help you feel how you want to feel? What are the things that help you feel fulfilled and centered and balanced and calm, and whatever those desired feelings are? And we need to be doing more of those things. We need to fill up that bucket so that we can then show up in relationship with other people feeling like we have something to give. We don't feel drained and depleted. And right now, there's a lot of being stuck at home. There's less separation between work and family and kids and whatever your unique situation is. There's just not those clear boundaries anymore. And so this bucket is getting really drained for a lot of people. It's a lot more time with kids if you have kids at home. It's a lot more responsibilities of tracking different Zoom meetings for everyone in the family. And so this bucket needs to be filled so that you have something to give. But then the other bucket is our stress bucket. So we also all have a certain capacity for stress. We all have, you can think of it like a thermostat. So we all have a certain capacity for stress where we feel comfortable. So as we add stressors to the bucket on the right, what happens is we get closer and closer and closer to our capacity. So with the quarantine and with the COVID-19 situation and with everything that's happening in the world right now, those are all stressors going into that bucket. Almost everybody that I talk to is pretty much operating at capacity or already overflowing in their stress bucket. So we need to figure out how to fill our bucket, but also create a release valve on our stress bucket so that we can alleviate some of that stress. Because when you're operating at capacity and then one tiny little thing happens, it becomes the straw that broke the camel's back. We flip our lid, we become emotionally dysregulated. And when we experience that instantaneous, intense activation of our stress response system, what happens is that our logical thinking brain actually goes offline. It is no longer involved because a stress reaction is fight, flight, or freeze. It is your body and your brain preparing to face a threat. And so when it takes one tiny thing and you explode, then part of what we need to do is alleviate some of that stress. And like any type of hygiene, this isn't something that you do once. You wouldn't, with toothbrushing, right? You wouldn't not brush your teeth for 6 months, but then visit the dentist twice a year and say, I'm good. I go to the dentist, they clean my teeth, we're fine. You wouldn't do that because that wouldn't be good physical health hygiene, good dental hygiene. We do that with self-care. We put it as such a low priority. We don't think that we have time for it. And I would argue that we don't have time not to do it, but it also doesn't have to take as much time as you think. What really is important is small, consistent activities over time. And that adds up to such a better outcome than like waiting 6 months and then going to the spa. Just kind of thinking of it as mental health hygiene is so important. Let me know in the comments. I'll be curious. I will look. If this makes sense to you, if this resonates, if you have questions about this double bucket system. And then just the other piece I think is so important. Even prior to the coronavirus situation, the American Psychological Association has been calling chronic stress a public health crisis. So just to be clear, when we experience a stressor, there's a part of our brain called the amygdala that you can think of as like a smoke detector. Incoming information comes into our brain. Our amygdala decides whether or not that information represents a threat to our safety and survival. If it does, our amygdala sounds the alarm, which is the activation of our stress response system. So when we have a stress response, our body is flooded with adrenaline and cortisol. Our heart rate becomes more quick, our breathing becomes more shallow, digestion stops or slows because we're preparing to face a physical threat. And in a normal, healthy, functioning stress response system, when that stress is mitigated or when we realize that there isn't a true physical threat, then all of our levels return to baseline fairly quickly. But what happens when we have chronic stress is that we never get back to baseline. And as a result, that leads to mental health symptoms. That leads to this statistic, 90% of all disease and disability, illness directly related to stress because of the physical impact of chronic inflammation, lowering our immune system. And then it also negatively impacts our kids. About 1/3 of American children report physical symptoms of stress. And the more stressed out we are, the more stressed out our kids are. So when we can learn how to create that release valve and really kind of calm that stress response and stop it from becoming chronic, that positively impacts everybody. And I'm realizing on time, I got to start moving more quickly. So we kind of just talked about this. Basically, as our stress levels go up, our resilience, our ability to handle challenges goes down. When we increase our resilience, stress impacts us less. And so vice versa, right? There's an inverse relationship here. Okay. So everything that requires your energy to thrive requires you to thrive. So this is such an important point to me because the reasons people say that they don't take care of themselves often have to do with obligations to other people. I don't have the time. I have kids. That would be nice, but I have a family. Things like that. I work 60 hours a week. Okay, I get that. And whatever it is that you care about, everything that requires your energy to thrive requires you to thrive. Self-care is the foundation upon which you build the rest of your life. So right now, we need to focus first on shifting our focus from what we can't control to what we can. So one of the things that I really love for my clients is this 3-part journaling prompt. So you're feeling stressed, you're feeling overwhelmed, you're feeling anxious. So part 1, ask yourself, how do I feel? Write it out. You can do this in your head if you want. It's a little more effective if you write it out. How do you feel? And be honest with yourself. I feel angry because I'm missing a trip that I had planned. I feel grief. I feel sadness. I feel confusion. I feel uncertain. Whatever it is, how do I feel? Part 2 is, what do I need? So what do you need? Do you need to know what's going to happen next? Do you need to plan a new trip for the future? What is it? And then the 3rd piece of this prompt is, okay, so how do you meet your need? One of the things that we are typically very bad at is proactively meeting our own needs. Somehow there's become this social narrative that self-care is selfish. And ultimately, if you can learn to meet your needs and be proactive about those things, you're going to show up in your life as a person that you're proud to be, as the best version of yourself. So we can't control knowing exactly when the phases are going to end or what's going to happen in the fall with the kids going back to school. I don't get to make that decision. So if what I need is a sense of predictability, how can I create that for myself in ways that I can control? And part of that is through creating realistic structures and routines that work for you. And everyone's needs will be different. And that's why when it comes to self-care, when it comes to any of this, there is not a one-size-fits-all. And it's so important to learn how to tune into yourself and listen to what your needs are without judgment. So we're redefining self-care. I encourage you to think about these questions. What does that really mean to you? Do you think it's important? And if you think it's important, do you really show up for yourself? Are you acting in ways that are consistent with that? And here's my definition. So I think that part of our disdain for self-care comes from the fact that we think it has to be like this big glamorous thing. It has to be a day at the spa or getting a massage or going to get a mani-pedi or something that's really fluffy. It's not. Self-care, this is my definition. Self-care means identifying how you want to feel and prioritizing the things that make you feel that way. So this gives you a framework. So for example, some of my desired feelings are to feel fulfilled, to feel peaceful, to feel energized, and to feel inspired. So now that I know that, now that I've done the work, to self-reflect and think about that, I can decide, okay, well, I want to do this thing. Does that help me feel one of these ways? And if it does, great, that's self-care, even if it doesn't look like self-care on the surface. For example, my sink is currently overflowing with dishes. And last night, my self-care was not doing the dishes. But today, in order to feel peaceful in my home, I'm probably going to want to do them. I don't think any one of us would say doing the dishes is self-care, but it is because it's helping me feel how I want to feel. So it's not the act of doing the dishes that's nurturing, it's giving myself that sense of peace in my home that is nurturing. And again, that's going to be different for everybody. Again, it's not negotiable. I think that we have a responsibility to change the narrative about self-care being something that's a nice to have. It is non-negotiable. It's the foundation upon which we build all of the relationships in our life, our work, our career, everything that's important to us. So when we're talking about how you can create your own sustainable self-care plan, keep these things in mind. In order to be really sustainable, it needs to be intentional, not based on a checklist. And that's why I really encourage you to check in with yourself about what you need and acknowledge and honor those needs. It needs to be proactive, not reactive. So it's something you do in small amounts every single day, not freaking out and then going to get a massage just to have an hour of alone time. It needs to be constantly evolving. What you need one day might not be the same as what you thought you should need or what you needed yesterday, and that's okay. It does really need to be consistent. It does not need to be time consuming. So we've talked about this. Self-care is mental health hygiene. And then we're going to talk about a framework that I use with my clients called the 5 pillars of foundational self-care. The 5 pillars of foundational self-care are evidence-based strategies for mental health hygiene, essentially. So let's look at those. So nutrition, sleep, movement, mindfulness, and reflection. All of these things have a direct and significant impact on our mental health, on our emotional health, on the way that we feel and the way that we show up. So we're going to go into each one of these just briefly. And then I really encourage you to take a peek at the workbook that Stephanie linked in the comments and that was sent via email. The workbook is sort of a self-reflection exercise in looking at, like, how am I doing in each pillar? What change could help me feel a little bit better? And what changes do I actually want to make? And it's really where you can kind of reflect a little bit and outline your own unique plan, because it will not look like anybody else's. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of cookie-cutter thing. So nutrition. So when I talk about nutrition as one of the 5 pillars, it's not about having a perfect diet. Not at all. It is about knowing and understanding that the way that we eat, the food that we eat, directly impacts our mood and our emotional health and our stability. And we want to choose foods that help us feel good. And that, again, is different for everybody. Like, you will know if I eat this big, massive meal of pasta and cheese, I'm not going to feel energized or focused. I'm going to take a nap for the rest of the afternoon. So knowing for you what those things are and eating in a way that aligns with your values and that helps you feel how you want to feel. If this is something that you want to learn more about, there's a great resource called foodandmood.org that I really enjoy for kind of more specifics on this. So nutrition. So how are you doing in that area? Are you eating pretty well? Are you eating in a way that weighs you down or a way that makes you feel pretty energized, that fuels you? And then sleep. Sleep is so important. Lack of sleep exacerbates all mental health symptoms, and practicing good sleep hygiene can help us have more sleep, a better quality of sleep. That's things like not using devices for 30 minutes before bed. That's things like having a bedtime routine. We know that people with insomnia are 10 times as likely to have clinical depression and 17 times as likely to have a clinical anxiety disorder. And part of the problem with lack of sleep is that it impacts our prefrontal cortex, which I referred to earlier as our thinking brain or our rational brain. And that's the part of our brain that governs executive functioning, which is essentially like good decision making and planning and organizing and all of those things. So important to be getting enough sleep for you. And something I know that at least some people here are kind of having some concerns with now. So as we kind of go through these 5 pillars, really thinking about, is there one area that you really need to focus on? Or are there little things you can do in each area? What does that look like for you? And not expecting it to look like anybody else's. And then movement. So we know that exercise reduces stress, increases endorphins, can possibly be as effective as antidepressants in reducing symptoms of depression for some people. And then the thing about movement in the 5 pillars framework is that it doesn't have to be an hour-long workout by any means. Movement in this framework is, of course, the endorphins and the stress reduction are great benefits. But really in this framework, what we're looking for is, are you staying connected to your own body? And that can be going on a walk, or it can be 5 minutes of stretching in your living room. It doesn't have to be something that you feel like you should do, and it probably is going to change day to day. And then we have mindfulness. So when I talked earlier about the stress response, that stress response is governed by our sympathetic nervous system. It's chronically activated. And so for mindfulness in the 5 pillars, we're really talking about, okay, so we know that your stress response is activated, your sympathetic nervous system is activated several times a day at a minimum. So how are you countering counteracting that by activating your opposite response, which is your parasympathetic nervous system. So we know that the sympathetic is fight, flight, or freeze. Parasympathetic governs a response known as rest and digest. It's essentially our body's calming response. So how are we doing that? One of the best ways is through deep breathing. A lot of people, for some reason, seem resistant to that. And I think it's because it's not really a quick fix. You know, we're not going to like deep breathe for 1 minute once a day and have this massive benefit, because we're having such a strong activation of our stress response. We have to counteract that. So that's something I think that causes resistance, but there are other things that fit into this category as well. So any type of a formal mindfulness practice or a meditation, a guided meditation, or just, you know, sitting in silence and focusing on your breathing on your own. Emotional freedom technique fits into this category if anyone's heard of that. So there's lots of other things that fit into this category. And if something doesn't feel right to you, or if something just you really experience resistance and you don't want to do it, you shouldn't do it. You should really be creating a plan that feels good to you. But deep breathing is pretty simple. And I think when you're creating your plan, you know, even doing 2 minutes of breathing twice a day would be a great start in this category. Oh, Victoria says EFT really works for her. EFT is so cool. I love EFT. So reflection. So in the 5 pillars framework, reflection is really about how are you living with intention? So are you creating the circumstances of your life, or are you just reacting to them? So part of this is cultivating a belief system that you have control over your life. You don't have control over certain circumstances, and that's probably true, but you do have control over how you respond to them, what self-care practices you do on a daily basis, and how you show up in your interactions with others. So for reflection, my personal favorite here is journaling. I'm a big believer in the power of journaling, and a lot of people are not into it. And I've learned that through working with different people over the years. So it doesn't have to be that, right? If my clients are at all willing to journal, I'm going to encourage them to do that. And I'm going to give them prompts, and I'm going to give them some ways to journal that they can be really effective and get a really big bang for their buck from that. But a lot of people aren't. So I have one client who, back when people went to offices, would audio journal on his way home from work, and he would just talk it out essentially. And he would listen to it once the next day, and then he would delete it, and then he would start over, and that worked really well for him. Reflection can also be things like positive affirmations. You know, it can be visualization. It can be practicing gratitude, using a gratitude journal. Any of those things would fit into this pillar. And the point, again, is to do the thing that feels good to you and works best for you. So this quarantine time has kind of brought us to this question of who do you want to be when no one is watching? And how do you want to show up for yourself? Because as we have been sort of more socially isolated during this time, you have to show up for yourself. And I think that what's happened for a lot of people is that we built these external structures of accountability to keep us accountable to our goals, to keep us accountable to showing up in the world in the way that we say we want to. Like, I go to the gym, or I go to a workout class, or I go to a yoga class, or I go on a run with a friend. And all of that's been removed. So this question comes up of, okay, so now you have a blank slate. You get to create your life however you want it to look right now. And obviously there are some things with the social pieces and all the pieces that we can't control. But within sort of the confines of your own little micro corner of the world and within your own home, how are you showing up and how do you want to show up? And something that's been really difficult for people is not having those external structures for accountability. And that feeling that we kind of talked about a bit in the introductions about, like, what's the point? Like, who cares? Nobody cares if I do yoga in my living room for 30 minutes today. But it's about showing up for yourself and cultivating that relationship with yourself where you are truly nurturing and caring for yourself. So this is your other handout. So this has been super instrumental for me and also for my clients. So I'm going to explain what this is for you. So every week I print this off, and I have these for my clients as well. What are my 3 main goals this week? What do I want to do? Because now I get to build this structure however I want it to look. And in the columns on the far left, we are writing what your goals are for each pillar. And then there's extra space down at the bottom for 2 additional goals. So for example, my nutrition goal is just to drink enough water. Like if I'm doing that every day, I'm happy in that category. So what's your goal? You know, and you just write it in there. What's your goal for movement? And mine changes every day. But am I moving my body? That's it. That's all I want to be doing. Reflection for me would be journaling. But again, like what is it for you? And using that space to write that in. And then throughout the week, you just color in the days that you did the thing. And from there, you have this nice sort of accountability for yourself to where you can say like, okay, I am taking pretty good care of myself most days. The thing that's really hard for me is practicing mindfulness. So now that I have this base foundation, I'm going to add in that 2 minutes of deep breathing, and I'm going to start there. And when you create your goals in the workbook, if you choose to do that, I would highly encourage you to create goals that almost too small. Because what it's about is creating some positive momentum for healthy habits, not setting yourself up to do everything perfectly all at once. Because if you commit to an hour a day out of the gate and you've been doing 0, I can almost guarantee you within a week, you're not going to be doing it at all anymore. So instead, I would rather have you say, I'm going to commit literally 5 minutes a day. I'm going to do a 3 minutes of deep breathing and 2 minutes of gratitude journaling. And then I'll go for a quick walk. And that's it. And then start there and do that consistently. And then incrementally, you can upgrade your goals. But start smaller than you think you want to. And then we're just about to wrap it up. So then just remember this.